Welcome to the first installment of the Movie Mirror. My name is Anthony Ramirez, and this is my reflection on Nightcrawler, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, written and directed by Dan Gilroy. Jake Gyllenhaal plays Louis Bloom, a psychopath whose endeavors we follow throughout the film as he delves deeper and deeper into the world of crime journalism in Los Angeles, California. What really made an impression on me was the depiction of psychopathy and some of the key characteristics of what defines a psychopath that I felt Dan Gilroy captured in the writing of Nightcrawler and Jake in his performance. Two common traits of psychopaths that are evident in Nightcrawler are a lacking in emotionally based empathy and an inflation in cognitive empathetic capabilities. Due to neurological factors in both nature and nurturing, such as neuroplasticity, cognitive empathy, which is essentially the ability to understand other people's states of being through more rational thought processes, often becomes dominant in individuals with psychopathy as a sort of compensation. Calculative thinking, logic, and reasoning are decisive in cognitive empathy, and one scene where it was evident that these traits are a part of the identity of Louis Bloom is in the restaurant with the Rene Russo character, Nina, who works for the news station that he sells his footage to. Based on the discourse that takes place between the two, it seems that Louis Bloom has deciphered the inner workings of Russo's character, and he is able to manipulate Nina to his will. And what ensues from that point as the film progresses is an almost systematic conformity to Bloom's intent. It showcases, from his end, an ability to assess what makes a person tick and how to manipulate that, which is rare in people who experience certain levels of empathy on an emotional level, as they are often bound to only understand based on the biases of their own identity. The scenes with Louis Bloom and his assistant Rick driving at night also serve as excellent exposition of the character Jake Gyllenhaal was depicting. Bloom's syntax is an example of the manner in which the script that Dan Gilroy wrote effectively laid the foundation for a brilliant character. The more we hear Louis Bloom speak, the more unambiguous his perspective becomes. At one point, Rick directly tells him that there is something unsettling about the way he sees the world. When Rick says this, as a viewer, you understand why he feels this way and you don't question it. But yet, in a dark way, you are still rooting for the character of Louis Bloom. One of the scenes that resonated most with me, even after the film had finished, was where Louis Bloom enters the home of the murder victims just as the crime has taken place. He enters with his camera rolling, making sure to capture every aspect of what has just taken place. At one point, Bloom is in what seems to be the living room of the house, and he notices a bloodied corpse on a sofa. Bloom has been flowing through the home, capturing as much of the carnage on film as possible, but as he approaches the body, he interrupts his movement just for a moment and adjusts his posture with the camera. It took me a moment to understand what he did and what his motivation was. This takes me back to earlier in the film, where in a conversation between Louis Bloom and Russo's character Nina, Bloom says, "I'm focusing on framing. A proper frame not only draws the eye into a picture, but keeps it there longer, dissolving the barrier between the subject and the outside of the frame." So clearly his intent was to properly frame the shot of the corpse on the sofa as to have the greatest effect on the viewers of the footage as possible. This clearly exhibits the disposition of a psychopath. There is no hesitation or sign of any emotional state evoked in Bloom, but a precise and coldly calculated reaction that accounts for his intent to capture a shot that will not only resonate with the viewers of the newscast, but with the employees of the news station who will be purchasing his footage. This brings me to a key aspect of both psychopathy and humanity in general, identity. Identity is formed by an amalgamation of all the factors that dictate who you are and how others perceive you. The projection of identity from oneself is similar in essence to the projection of the content of a shot and how it's framed. Things I've mentioned previously, such as disposition and syntax, play key roles in how a person is interpreted, no different from how the framing of a shot will determine the effect it has on the viewers of the footage. Psychopaths are masters of controlling how they are perceived in their interactions with other people and are able to adapt their personality, the outer layer of identity, to suit their current environment. Throughout the film, we see Bloom and his interactions with people always appealing to each individual based not on Bloom's own identity, but on how his identity will be perceived by others. This is a defining trait of a psychopath, and Louis Bloom's focus on the framing of shots in the world of crime journalism is greatly reflective of his psychopathic perspective. In discussing the film Nightcrawler, Jake Gyllenhaal's performance as Louis Bloom must be acknowledged. Gyllenhaal allows himself to be consumed by the character, which was necessary since the role isn't an explosive one, but implosive. As a matter of fact, the only scene where Louis Bloom is in a high emotional state is where, out of frustration with himself, he yells into a mirror and breaks it. By the way, psychopaths may not be able to experience levels of empathy, but they can absolutely sympathize with themselves. This is important to mention because generally the moments where audiences become invested in a character is during scenes of intense emotion that are effectively executed by an actor. In the discussion of Nightcrawler, though, it is the disappearance of the actor into the identity of the Louis Bloom character that allows audiences to accept him as the protagonist of the story. The eerie disposition that Gyllenhaal adapts, along with his worthy interpretation of a brilliant script, goes hand in hand with writer-director Dan Gilroy's seamless pacing, allowing us to vicariously experience a compelling story through the lens of a psychopath.